Okay, here we go. Here we go. So, in this evening's reading, I'll introduce James Longenbach, and then Victoria Riddell will introduce Joanna Scott. In his book of essays entitled The Resistance to Poetry, Jim Longenbach argues, or proposes, that poems often inspire our trust because they don't necessarily ask to be trusted. They interrogate not only what they look at out there in what is sometimes called the world, but interrogate themselves. This they manage to do in several ways, Jim tells us. For example, by suggesting slyly or explicitly that the subjects they seem to be discussing are not in fact what they are after. Elsewhere, they allow their poems to speak in the voice of a speaker or a persona who seems not quite to have the confidence of the poet, who clearly enjoys setting in motion the doubts that fuel our interest in such poems. Of course, there are poets who like more than others just to play games, to tease and provoke and undercut and baffle for no purpose beyond the exercise of power that occasionally comes with such manipulations. But Jim Longenbach is not that kind of writer, not at all. He is a poet interested in poetry as an instrument for the exploration of consciousness and emotion. He thinks of poetry as a form of urgent address, emphasis on the word urgent. Quote, especially when it has something urgent to say, Jim writes, a poem's power inheres less in its conclusions than in its propensity to resist them, unquote. Jim's mind is always fine enough to resist the content, the ideas, to which it is nonetheless insistently drawn. The best poems, he rightly argues, and again, this is a quote, are nourishing because of the fervor with which they confront themselves, unquote. My emphasis here on fervor and confront, as in challenge and resist. Of course, it's tempting here simply to bring Jim out and ask you to listen to how well his own poems accomplish the feat he describes. But I want to point a little to one or two particular object lessons before yielding to that temptation. Elsewhere in Jim's poems, there are gestures signaling varieties of resistance. In one poem, he cites a painting, names it, even gives its dimensions, 11 by 12, then says, won't resolve into a scene. I put my own accent there on the word won't, which apparently gets at the painting's resistance to resolving, but also suggests the poet-speaker's refusal to let the thing resolve. Just so, when Jim alludes to beauty, he refuses to let it take over his poem, refuses to settle into anything like the easy consolation that beauty lovers often seek in simply wonderful or sumptuously featured poems. The eyes of Jim's speakers are alert to loveliness, but often can't or won't entirely like what they see. At one moment in Jim, quote, the sun is shining on the Umbrian hills, but at once the image is caught, stopped in its tracks, naturally it seems, by this line, for years I suffered from back pain and dread of lying down, succumbing to fatigue, unquote. Nothing programmatic in the poet's refusal to simply bask in the sun shining on those Umbrian hills, and yet a quietly principled disinclination to yield or mildly enjoy is everywhere present. The poet's self-assurance has to do with his alertness to the coexistence of pleasure and pain, mildness and unease. The quiet intensity in Jim's work has much to do with the way he allows himself to happen upon things without quite making them seem random. Beneath every move in the poems, there is an uninsistent sense that a kind of revelation is in store for him and for us if we are patient. But then the revelation will never quite be decisive, we feel. The loose ends will not be tied up. Even images apparently pregnant with important meanings will not be read or interpreted as if they were a reliable key to unlock their secrets. The sentiments in Jim's work are unmistakable. We feel in the poems the presence of actual others who move through the poet's imagination and fire his feelings. And yet, also, there is a sense that the poet won't allow the poems to devolve into themes or portraits, that he resists the impulse to make these works too definite. The lampposts in a beloved Venetian landscape are characteristically, quote, hidden in fog. And the way Jim charts can be, as he says, pathless, comfortless, however much he is willing to be surprised into clarity or pleasure. Everywhere in Jim's work, especially in his wonderful recent book, The Iron Key, there is that sense of waiting for revelations that are bound to be thrilling, though you know you will never quite grasp them. It's spring, one of Jim's remembered mentors tells him. Trees are coming into leaf, like something almost being said. Jim Longenbach.
Thank you, Bob. Joanna and I were counting up. This is I think the 19th year I've been here in some shape or form, and it just keeps getting better. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah. Good. I'm going to read 4 poems. The first one is short, and the second one is not so very much longer, but it will come to you in little parcels that are formally discrete, but not syntactically discrete. So the parcel ends, there is a sense of momentous closure. But the sentence keeps going. I will register this when reading the poem by pausing in a way that initially will seem to you dorky and annoying. But trust me, by the end of the poem, you will want to do it yourself. You will be seduced into a soundscape that you will never let go of. That's the second poem. The first one is called Christmas. When I was young, I saved my money. I bought a car, a new car. Lean on me, said the radio, when you're not strong. I'd known that song since I was young, but every time I heard it, I wanted to hear it again. I drove to the supermarket, then drove home. I looked behind the radiator, under the bed, as if I were standing in the kitchen, unloading the dishwasher, holding the phone. I heard my mother's voice. I heard it plainly, as if she were standing in the room. I know it's early, she said, but I'm planning ahead for Christmas. So I'd like to remember. What kind of coffee do you like? Regular? Or decaf? Or both at certain times? I want to be prepared in case you'd like a cup when you're here. Book 3. Long ago, before you were born, I lived in a house at the edge of the forest. It was a yellow house. You've heard me speak of it before. Much of what happened in the house was interesting, even amusing. But at times I felt weighed down by a sadness impossible to overcome, as if I lived at the bottom of a dark pit. No prospect, but a slender aspen tree against the sky. Languidly, but not idly, one morning I began to draw the tree. Its lines insisted upon being followed, and as one branch rose from another, finding its place in the air, the tree became more beautiful. By laws finer than any known to me, the tree composed itself. And when at last it was there in front of me, looking back, everything I'd ever thought about trees had disappeared. At night, deer came down the hill to look in my windows. And in the morning, I climbed the hill, treading softly, as if to look into theirs. As for the pit, the furies, and the snakes, the gloomy caverns and the burning lakes, and last and most, if these were left behind, the avenging horror of a conscious mind, they neither are, nor were, nor ever can be. Lucretius, On the Nature of Things, Book 3. And if death were but the absence of consciousness, like a long sleep unbroken by dreams, it would be a wonderful thing. All my life, I prayed I would die quickly. When finally the moment of death was upon me, I could neither see you nor hear you, though I felt certain you were with me, just as I can see you now. Anyone who didn't know you would presume you're waiting for something to happen. But in fact, it's happening as I speak. The sky is clear. The breeze is cool. Though the sun may turn to darkness and the moon to blood, the dead will see visions and the living will dream dreams. Mist Valley. Look, it's there for me.
What was the title? We missed it up here.
I missed it down here too. The title is Mist Valley. Thank you. At the end of summer, All the letters of the alphabet are waiting. The same few letters, making many different words. Often I've rearranged them on the surface of the fridge. Without the surface, they're repulsed by one another. The same words, meaning different things. At the end of summer, the mind is neither the pokeweed piercing the grass, nor the grass itself. As Tony Cook says in The Biology of Terrestrial Mollusks, the right thing to do is nothing. The place, a place of concealment, and the time as often as possible. This poem, Climate of Reason, comes to you in 8 longer parts. It's called Climate of Reason. No. I asked if you could hear me, and you lied. I didn't know you couldn't hear. Climate of reason. Climate of Reason 1. Whenever I find myself growing grim about the mouth, whenever it is a drizzly November in my soul, I get myself to the desert, where there is only rock and sand. Just thinking about it, making sentences about it, some of the words borrowed, some of them my own, is almost enough. I bring a water bottle and a book. At this point, the same thing always happens. I pour the water on the ground. As quickly as it leaves the bottle, glistening for a moment in sunlight, the water evaporates. Sometimes I spend the night there, curled up on the sand. I imagine the beasts of the desert circling me, lions and wolves protecting me. But most nights I return to the house from which I came. I sleep in a bed where recently another man died. A headboard, 2 pillows, a quilt that someone long ago stitched by hand. My mother stitched quilts by hand. When I return to the desert the next morning, a tree has grown up where I poured the water. All day, I sit beneath the branches. 2. Enfeebled by prolonged fasting, the hermit finds himself unable to concentrate on holy things. His thoughts wander. Memories of his past evoke regrets he can no longer suppress. And as memory begets memory, he turns ever more deeply into himself. He rehearses his flight from home, his mother, her perfume. He remembers his visit to Alexandria, the sights of the luxurious city, the slender bodies of both girls and boys. Involuntarily, he yields to the dissatisfaction growing inside him. He laments his solitude, his joylessness, his poverty. Grace departs from him. Hope burns low in his heart. He dreams of the Maccabees slaughtering their enemies and desires that he might do likewise with the Alexandrians. He indulges in reveries concerning the riches of biblical kings. The Sphinx, the Chimera, all the abnormalities described by Herodotus he beholds. Grotesqueries made animate, a Sabbath of abominations, as if everything inside of him had spoiled. Sand drifts follow the course of the winds, rising and falling like great shrouds. 3. I could go on like this. There's nothing in the desert but time. Time to read, to think, but mostly time to read nothing, to think about nothing. You go there encumbered, needing to be alone. And in almost no time, you're lonely, which is what you want, but also what you dread. The landscape stretching far as you can see. Nothing but rubble. Mountains in the distance red against a cobalt sky. 1 minute you're sharing a good bottle of wine. You're eating tortelloni stuffed with ricotta and pear, a little sautéed kale on the side. Then you're in the desert. There's work to do. The desert says, study that tree. What is it like? A silly old man. 4. A certain man, revered by the fathers, was living in the desert of Porphyria. For sustenance, he had a date palm over his head, a small garden at his feet. When the date palm sprouted new branches, he collected the old ones, thinking they might someday be of use. Have you ever lived alone a long time? Then you know that for the hours when the sun appears unmoving directly overhead, this man was beset with fatigue, as if recovering from a long journey. He turned his head anxiously, first to the left, then to the right, to see if anyone approached. He called to the beasts of the desert that they might return. No one to talk to, nothing to see. So while it was a journey of 7 days to the nearest city, making the conveyance of his handiwork more costly than the sum such handiwork might fetch, he began to weave baskets. slowly at first, then with great dexterity. The brighter the sunlight, the more intricate the designs. The date palm dropped more branches, the days passed quickly as the nights, and at the end of the year, when his hut was filled to capacity, he burned the baskets, mixing the ashes into the soil. 5. Song of the Desert. Once I was a girl. I fell in love. Against my better judgment, I allowed myself to fall in love. Then I was not a girl. I was the earth. Pour me a glass of water. Once I was the sea. 6. Song of the Basket. Had you permitted it, earth, I would have loved you like a little bird that picks up crumbs. 7. Essentially, an artist's work consists of giving life to the dead matter of the material world. That matter is the artist's medium. The artist is in love with it. He may, as lovers do, selfishly expect that what he loves him. But if the artist loves the medium enough to submit to its real qualities, refusing to exaggerate how they might please him, the result may justify his idealization. Such artists fear not so much boredom as work without pleasure. In fact, if their work is to succeed, they require boredom. They must wait for its effect. Moments when the artist in each of us created the material world by finding the unfamiliar in the familiar, by finding what we'd never known to be ourselves in what seemed dead. Such moments are forgotten by most people, or else they're guarded in a secret place of memory, too much like visitations of the gods to be mixed with everyday feeling. Eight. Before there was the tree, there was the house. Before the house, the bed. Before the bed, the quilt. I could have stayed in the desert forever, except I was hungry. I had to eat. So I returned to the house. I made a sandwich. Dawn was in the kitchen. Claudia was reading on the deck. A rabbit skittered once, then twice, then laid its ears against its head. In the middle of the desert, you might be anyone, except you're never in the middle. You're at the edge. Then you're yourself again. You look in the mirror. It's like magic. there you are. Thank you.
Can you hear me? I'll start with a confession. Every day, I'm horrified by my lapses as a reader. It's one of my private shames. That swath of glorious, unread books. And knowing that time, my own, narrows increasingly my chances to ever manage my loss of these private pleasures. Because finally, a book is that for me, to sit inside the unspooling act of imagination delivered in language, the shape of character and circumstance through a writer's particular angle. So, when Bob wrote asking who I might introduce this year, I leapt on introducing Joanna Scott, a writer who I knew about but had not read. I didn't look her up. I didn't Google her. I did what I know most to trust. I began to read her. I stuck with the novels for no good reason, and I didn't read them in any order for no good reason. But this last month, I've feasted. And so perhaps undigested a little bit and tipsy with the richness of Scott's prose and with the expanse of her worlds, I offer a little bit of my enormous pleasures. At first, what I was loving was the range of place and material in Joanna's work. It's notable immediately for exactly that range. The island of Elba, Egon Schiele's Austria, the rural hamlets and towns along the Tuskegee River, invented, and a decaying estate way the hell in the middle of nowhere, New York. And that's just a few of them. And the sense of place, that very thinginess, the thing I love most in work, that is so crucial to creating vivid prose, is always present, every page, and it's never decorative. It makes place a central block of her novel's architectures. But then, more interestingly to me, was that doubled sense of the boundary that was always present in each of Joanna's novel's terrains. In Liberation, it's the island of Elba, not the mainland of Italy. In Mannequin, it's the Craxton Estate, a far outpost in far up New York. In Follow Me, it's the towns just miles from one another, so separated by a landscape as to be unknown to one another. There is always a kind of wilderness, and at the boundary, always that terrible pressure as the wild abuts the cultivated. But even more, Scott gives stories. I'm going to lose myself a little in my penciling. Scott gives the story to the ones that are most at the boundary, as if she's made the deliberate choice, and she has made the deliberate choice, to give the least knowing the ones who can most invent a world within the world. So that it's Adriana, 11 years old, who begins the novel Liberation, shut inside a cabinet where she's been put to protect her from the soldiers. And of the soldiers, it's Amdou, a 17-year-old French-Senegalese, and who knew that the French-Senegalese army were part of the liberation? Not me. who is not with his regiment, but has fled, having been in the war, quote, almost a year and still hasn't fired his rifle at anything alive. He made no secret of the fact he would never kill a creature. He considered himself as close to a saint as he could come without actually communicating to God, end quote. In Mannequin, it's not the estate's owner, already dead at the start of the novel, nor is it his wife, practically dead, but those others, the others we hear from all askew, who tend to the estate most robustly inhabited now by its taxidermied animals. Yet the larger world looms in Joanna's work always, most insistently always in the longings of her young women and their hope for bigger lives. Joanna's always pivots young women against the constraints of work, of pregnancy, of family, of lacks of imagination around them. There is always in these novels a yearning, a desire thwarted and corrupted. Desire so present on every page that Joanna writes, the insistence of nature, the obsessions of all of her characters, the taxidermist who needs to reshape the dead to their ultimate living stance, the need of the groundskeeper to render the natural world beautiful, precise, and useful, desire to make good the error, the abandoned child, the lie, the longing. Joanna belongs to a great tradition of storytelling. She angles into it in the unlikely accident, the unlikely mind, and she does so with such spirited love for our inevitable human error that we are, no, I have been this last month made much more human by my reading experience. I've been feasting, and I'm happy for that. I'm happy for the chance to feast some more and for another serving of it tonight. Thanks.
Thank you for that beautiful introduction, the magisterial Victoria. That was awesome. Can you hear me? Hello? That's an illusion, some of you will know, right? Such a pleasure to be here, to be back. I just love this place. And how many years ago, Bill, did this idea come into your head, Bill Kennedy? 86. He had an idea, and he knew that something this sturdy and sustainable would come out of it. So thank you. Anyway. I am going to start off with just a 5-minute piece that is about my life as a young writer. I thought it would be appropriate in this community of we're thinking about writing, talking about writing. Special thanks to my students for their very spirited engagement in the class. But anyway, I thought this is a good thing to just start off with. And it involves a visiting writer I worked with who has come up in discussion recently in the last couple of days. So this is called, and it's all true, Your Dinner with Susan Sontag. I know, It's April in Providence, and you're an eager, impatient first-year graduate student enrolled in a writing program. You've been telling yourself that you must be a sponge and absorb whatever there is to learn, but so far, you haven't been satisfied with anything you've written. Your wastebasket is overflowing with false starts. One moment you feel defeated, the next exhilarated. Everything matters too much or too little. You are in a hurry to get on with life. No, you want to slow it down. You want to make every moment count. You type too quickly and read too slowly. You tell yourself that for every window you've ever looked through, there's a story to tell. You live off campus in the third-floor apartment of a boxy yellow federal-style home on Governor Street. Last night you went with friends to a Violent Femmes concert at RISD. All agreed that it was a blast, though one of your friends got a bloody nose while slam dancing in the aisle. Back in your bedroom, you fell asleep to the sound of rain against the window. When you blink awake, the morning sunlight has turned the fog drifting through the Fox Point neighborhood to gold. You hear a robin in the garden. You hear your landlady in the driveway declare that Narragansett Bay is beautiful this time of year. You hear a man blow his nose. You look out the window and see him there dressed in red jeans holding his car keys as he listens to the landlady. You get out of bed and shuffle between books scattered across the warped pinewood floor, navigating through Homer, Dante, Goethe, Dickens, Fielding, Auerbach, Hardwick, Gadamer, Carter. There is a stack that includes Joseph Conrad's Underwestern Eyes, the subject of an essay you're supposed to write. The Phaedrus, bookmarked at the passage when Socrates compares the soul to a chariot, and paperbacks by Hanke, Chekhov, and Gass, recommended by your current writing instructor, Susan Sontag, or the Duchess, as she's known among you and your classmates. What an honor it has been to study with the Duchess, one of the country's leading intellectuals. You've read every word she's published. You are starstruck. You hang on all her comments. She makes a point of having dinners with her students, and it's your turn tonight. You are praying you won't say something unbearably stupid. You pack your book bag and walk up George Street, stopping in the English department to check your mail. There's a note from your instructor from last semester, Robert Coover, who besides teaching you about writing, also generously gave up several hours of his free time to teach you how to use that fancy new machine called a computer. His letter is an addendum to a conversation you had with him the day before about a word processing program. If you, quote, if you type receive the next time you're logged on, you will have improved upfront material. Not a bad idea to type receive each time you log on, for that matter, best Bob. You spend the morning in the basement of the library writing what looks like chicken scratch and supposedly is the beginning of a novel. A few minutes before 11, you head to your part-time job in the rare books department where you spend 2 hours making catalog notes about Broma Seltzer song pamphlets from the 1890s. After work, you grab a quick onion bagel from the Blue Room, which you eat in your romanticism class, while a fellow student presents a paper called The Quest for Forgetfulness in Byron's Manfred. All day, you worry about what you will say during your dinner with Susan Sontag. She is a formidable woman, precise and passionate, never, like you, at a loss for words. You imagine her asking, how can you aspire to be a novelist when you're always at a loss for words? The afternoon speeds on. As you're walking back down George Street, it starts to rain again. You feel defeated, useless, misled by your dreams. You rehearse what you're going to record in your journal. I am a drive-in movie theater, and the parking lot is empty because of the rain, but the film still flickers on the screen like a school of silver barracuda in the Gulf of Key West. This is wretched writing. You have to admit, at least you haven't written it yet. You change from your sweatshirt and jeans into a skirt and sweater. On your way out, you meet your landlady who is repotting her night blooming cereus. She promises that on the night the cereus blooms, she will have a party, and you and your roommates will be invited. You take it as a good omen that the unreliable alternator of your Volkswagen Rabbit is functioning properly, and you drive to an Armenian restaurant in East Providence. There is a neon Schaefer sign in the front window, and the restaurant is empty except for the waitress and the cook who grills meats over open coals. You wait on a bench for the rest of your group. Lori arrives first, then David pulls up in his Dodge coupe with the Duchess in the passenger seat. At the table, you and Susan Sontag share a bowl of pistachios. She tells the waitress, we are going to be here a long while, and orders 2 carafes of Valpolicella wine. I am having a difficult time keeping my wits, she announces once the wine has been poured. Then she launches into a story about a 30-odd-year-old friend of hers who recently confessed that she'd slept with her own 30-odd-year-old brother. The friend made a plan with her brother to meet in a city far away from family and friends. They had dinner and went to a hotel. Susan Sontag sips her wine and continues. I asked her what she felt. She said and this is Sontag quoting, "We just lay in bed and giggled, thought if our parents could only see us now." You don't know whether to laugh or express horror. Luckily, your friend Lori takes the risk and laughs first, then David laughs and Susan Sontag laughs, so you're safe to join them. Susan Sontag talks about many things. She talks about famous writers she has met over the years. She tells us about their secret scandals, their obsessions and peccadillos. About one, she says, "I know someone who had an affair with her in the 1940s, but she doesn't know that I know." About another, she says, "His wife is a slave, and he dictates all his books to her." She talks about meeting Nadine Gordimer at a writers' conference. Nadine approached me in the hotel lobby and said, "Susan Sontag, I really admire your work. And though I am usually irreproachably honest," I said, "Nadine Gordimer, I admire your work so much, though I had never read a word of it." She pauses, stabs at her food. "We became fast friends," she recalls. You can't help but be enthralled. On she goes, talking about how she lived in China and Tucson and Southern California, how she married when she was 17 and divorced when she was 26. She loves New York, she says. She has a duplex on East 17th Street, and the man at her local deli tells her, "Susan, I got a name for your new book, The Life of a Deli Employee." No, here's a better one, The Death of a Deli Employee. She says it's easy to make friends in New York. She says that everyone in the Soviet Union hates the government there. She says that John Updike will never write a great book, but he has a great prose style. And after finally noticing the waitress dozing in a chair across the empty restaurant, she says, "They want to close up here," and puts on her coat. It is still raining when you climb into bed. You scribble something in the spiral notebook you use as your journal, but language strikes you as inefficient. You wish you could make your words sound like the rain. You consider all that you have learned since the morning. You can't include everything, so you try to anticipate what you will want to remember years from now. If anyone ever asks you to describe a typical day in the life of a graduate writing student, circa 1984. That's what it was like back then. Thank you. I've always been nervous about drinking water in front of an audience because for 18 years of my life, when I drank, I would use my sleeve to wipe my mouth, and I have to keep reminding myself not to do that. Okay, I'm gonna just read a couple of short sections. It's only 10 after 8, and it will always be 10 after 8 in this room, so we don't have to go anywhere ever. This is a book coming out. I read from it a couple of years ago when it was in progress, and now it's this is a galley, so it's a virtual book. It's virtually out almost. It's out in September, and it's called De Potter's Grand Tour. Okay, when I say that title, De Potter's Grand Tour, can I ask a question? Are we allowed to do that here? Yeah. What do you think of? Like, does it make you, The Potter's Grand Tour, does it make you, what do you think the book's about? Travel. Thank you. My university president just last week asked me what the title of my new book was, and I told him, and he said, "Well, that tells me nothing." Thanks. So, on behalf of my narrator, Armand de Potter, let me promise you that my grand tour around the world will be not only first class in every particular, but the best which that term in its widest sense implies. I have been preparing this tour for some time past, wishing to have all my plans fully matured so as to offer the most enjoyable trip ever made around the globe. The appointments, travel, hotels, carriages, and sightseeing will be unsurpassed. Plan of travel throughout the tour will be such as to make it perfectly comfortable for ladies as well as gentlemen. In short, it will be a voyage de luxe, and in the conductorship of the party and the character of our arrangements, the best traditions of the De Potter tours will be fully realized. So this book tells the story of a man named Armand de Potter, who came from Belgium to the US in the early 1870s, and he opened a travel agency, and he proceeded to lead tours first through the old world, Europe, and then expanded it to include Northern Europe, and then the Levant, and up the Nile, and then led several tours at the end of the 19th century around the world, year-long tours. That's how long it took to travel around the world. He married a woman from the Hudson Valley named Amy Beckwith, and when she married him, she changed her name to Aimée de Potter, but everybody always called her still Amy. The De Potters had a charmed, loving marriage. They lived a glamorous life. In the 1902, they bought a luxurious villa in the south of France in Cannes. Armand began collecting Egyptian antiquities with passion. The passion turned into an obsession, as passions sometimes do. Everything from the outside looked great, and then in 1905, he disappeared mysteriously at sea. And this novel attempts to solve this mystery. So there are two incidental things to know about Armand de Potter. He had a metal plate in his head from an accident, plate used to repair a fractured skull. And he was my great-grandfather. Whoa, oh, I didn't expect that. Whoa. So here's how we meet him at the beginning of the novel. I'll take you on two journeys in this book. There are many more, but these are just two today. Constantinople. He leaves early on the morning of June 10th, descending the carpeted stairs to the lobby of the Para Palace Hotel. He rings the bell at the front desk. He is about to ring again when a clerk appears from the dark interior of a back office, looking freshly scrubbed, smelling of soap. The bill is settled swiftly, and the clerk is most obliging, despite his limited French, when Armand hands him two last letters addressed to Madame de Potter, care of the Hotel Royal in Toblach. The letters are to be held and posted, he specifies, on the 12th. Does the clerk understand the instructions? Oui, monsieur, the clerk says, setting aside the letters and motioning to a porter. He hopes Monsieur de Potter's most recent stay has been pleasant. The coach, he adds, is already in the drive. Outside, Armand notices that the gas lamp above the entrance to the public garden is still lit, though the sky is already beginning to glow with dawn. He removes his spectacles and rubs the lenses with his handkerchief. After the porter has returned with his trunk and hoisted it onto the baggage rack, Armand tips him a handful of piastres and climbs into his seat. The driver slaps the reins to rouse his horses, and the carriage lurches forward. Down they go from the summit of Para, the wheels clattering over the uneven paving stones, the chassis rising and plunging, the horses moving so fast that a small dog doesn't have time to get out of their path. The yelp the dog lets out has a chillingly human ring, and Armand thinks it must have been crushed. Yet when he turns, he is relieved to see it scramble out from between the rear wheels and run off, disappearing around a corner. The horses trot on briskly, undeterred. He resists calling out to the driver to order him to slow down. Pulling his hat on tighter, he sits back and observes the scenery, contemplating the familiar landmarks as if from a great distance. The banks and restaurants he knows so well, and the convent where, 2 days earlier, the members of his party were delighted to come upon the dervishes right when they were beginning to whirl. As they pass one of the white mansions housing an embassy, he is reminded of his father, who had been stationed abroad for nearly a decade, first in Paris, then Dakar, and lastly Constantinople. He supposedly worked as a manager for a Belgian trading company, but Armand, who was stuck back in East Flanders with his brother and stepmother, believed that his father was a spy appointed by King Leopold to pry into the secret affairs of foreign governments. He used to tell himself that he, too, would be a spy someday and travel around the world. You could say that he did become a spy of sorts on a self-appointed mission to gather antiquities instead of secrets, with his travel bureau providing an excuse to visit places that were out of reach for other collectors. DePotter Tours is in the business of leading wealthy tourists around the world, and the DePotter collection is on display at the University Museum in Philadelphia. It has been an honorable arrangement, he believes. It worked for more than a quarter of a century and would have gone on working if he hadn't grown so careless. At least he managed to keep the Americans on his tour sufficiently entertained. They never guessed that he had anything else on his mind but their well-being as he shepherded them around the city. Even when he put them on the train and sent them off to Brusa without him, they were persuaded that he was sparing them a worse inconvenience. As far as they could tell, Professor DePotter was his usual amiable self, as reliable a guide as they had been promised in the testimonials he included in his advertisements. From the late Henry W. Bellows, D.D. of Albany, I have great pleasure in saying that I am acquainted with Professor A. DePotter. I do not doubt his trustworthiness and competency to conduct foreign tours in the interest of education, and I can heartily recommend him. From H.H.W. of Rome, New York, there are various ways of traveling, many as we do, independently and at the mercy of sharks. The only party that we have envied was that of Professor Armand DePotter of New York, an unassuming gentleman speaking 9 different languages. To him we shall commend any friends in the future who wish to make a tour of the old world. The friends of HHW would have to find another guide, since Professor DePotter won't be conducting any more parties. Never again will he have to worry about making arrangements for packs of inexperienced tourists, keeping track of their tickets and explaining the sights. On this trip, he is traveling alone. Down, down, down rolls the coach past buildings fronted by broken terraces and wilted gardens to the boulevard skirting the inlet of the Golden Horn. The low angle of the sun catches the top of a minaret on the opposite hill and turns the white to rose. On the surface of the still water beside the road, the reflections of the plane trees look as though they are frozen in ice. They reach the lot beside the custom house where Armand pays the driver and hires a handler for his trunk. The official greets him with a yawn, waving him through without asking him to open his satchel. On the quay, he takes out the gold-plated pocket watch his wife gave him on his 39th birthday and checks the time. It will be an hour or more until the ship is ready to receive passengers. There is nothing to do but wait. So that's how we first meet Armand DePotter in the book. I can show you, actually, I don't know if you can see it, but there are pictures in this book. That's the villa that they lived in. I'll show you. Anybody who wants to see can come up afterwards. But what happened about 5 years ago, this book has taken me a long time to write. I've talked to some people about it. It was a vexing project. I began at first as nonfiction and then as some sort of fiction, fiction faction hybrid. And then I decided this had to be a novel. So 5 years ago, the way I got started on this was my mother reminded me of an old steamer trunk that had been carted around for years. No one had ever opened it. No one had paid any attention to it. What do you want with an old steamer trunk? It was in the basement storage area in her apartment building. So we went down and we opened it, and inside were letters, legal correspondence, old wills, about 100 or more magic lantern slides. You know what? Those are the wonderful images. Prints, itineraries, travel menus from a hotel in 1888 in Geneva. But there were also 6 diaries that my great-grandmother had kept. And she'd put them away. In each diary covered 5 years. Together, the 6 diaries covered good 30 years of their lives and revealed secrets about Armand de Potter and their marriage that had never been told, never been revealed in the family. So what do if you're a writer and you find 6 diaries full of secrets? You write a book. I was sure this book was going to go like that. I thought, this is a story I couldn't make up, right? And then, boy, it was difficult. So one more short section about the same length as the last. This is a very different kind of journey. Armand, the first place his antiquities, his collection, was exhibited was at the World's Fair in Chicago, the Columbian Exposition in 1893. And actually, there's a little picture of it. He called it his Egyptian Pantheon. And he was very excited to have it there. He was hoping it would earn a medal. The point was for him to sell it and then earn back some money. He was losing money quickly on these antiquities. He ended up not selling it and instead sending it to the Philadelphia Museum. But this section picks up with Armand and his son, Victor, a little boy at this point. The novel moves around in time, so from that opening section, I go back and back again and back again. But here we are at the World's Fair of Chicago in 1893 with our tour guide, Armand de Potter. On the 5th day, Amy, his wife, woke up with a fever and stayed behind at the hotel while Armand took little Victor to the fair. Instead of going directly to the anthropological building where his exhibition was housed, they continued on the tram to the far end of Jackson Park. He thought they'd start the day with a visit to the horticultural building, but at the last minute he changed his mind and he decided to take Victor to see the exhibits along the narrow strip of land known as the Midway Plaisance. Armand had been inclined to avoid the Midway Plaisance. The official guide to the fair warned that admission fees were charged at every booth along this mile-long stretch, and the exhibits there had no connection with the exposition proper, excepting as side attractions. Its promoters claimed that the Midway Plaisance represented all foreign nations under the sun. Its detractors called it the church annex and blamed it for draining visitors of time and money. It had been added as an afterthought to accommodate the concessionaires and entertainers. But within days, it became so popular and the crowds so thick that, as one visitor testified, you could drop a rubber ball from a window and it would bounce off hats and bonnets without ever touching the ground. All the new arrivals to Chicago asked to be taken straight to the Midway Plaisance. That morning, Armand decided to join them and see what all the hoopla was about. From all his traveling, he was adept at dodging the prongs of parasols, the glowing ash of cast-off cigars underfoot, and he knew, of course, never to let go of his son in the crowd. There at the headwaters of the great fair's sideshow, the mob was thick, but Armand wasn't going to let the smell of 1,000 bodies sweating beneath the blazing spring sun on a humid May day in Chicago dissuade him. He lifted Victor onto his shoulders, and as soon as he saw a gap in the roiling mass, he pushed through, synchronizing his steps with the strides of the strangers on either side as he went through the entrance, where an announcer shouting through a bullhorn promised the public shows so remarkable that one man could never hope to find them all in his lifetime were he compelled to search for them himself. Armand stood Victor back on his feet when they reached the first exhibit, the International Dress and Costume Company, featuring 45 lovely women, each wearing the costume of her country. Rumor had it that this was the most profitable exhibit along the Midway Plaisance. In the time that Armand and Victor were there, it also appeared to be the place where arguments broke out and friendships were lost forever, simply because one man objected when another insisted that India was more beautiful than China, or that Ireland had hips promising more fecundity than Italy. Victor thought the fistfights were part of the show and wanted to stay to find out how they ended. Armand assured him that they were better things to see, and to prove it, he led the boy to the next station, where workers spun threads of colored glass as thin as gossamer for napkins and lampshades and even dresses that crinkled and sparkled as the girls modeling them sashayed across the stage. Victor squinted in wonder. He looked up at his father with an expression suggesting that he was trying to organize his thoughts into a question, but he gave up and just rubbed his nose vigorously and went on watching. After a few minutes, they moved on, flowing with the crowd toward the entrance of the Electric Scenic Theater. "You sure don't want to pass this one by, little mister," the announcer said directly to Victor, leaving Armand with no choice but to buy 2 tickets to the show. A day in the Alps had just started. Victor sat transfixed on his father's lap as the sun rose over the highest peak, illuminating scenes of sloping meadows populated by herds of sheep, when shepherd boys danced with shepherd girls, and 9 electric fans positioned around the room whipped up a refreshing breeze. The whole crowd sighed, Armand included. And when they heard the first harsh boom of thunder and saw a jagged shard of light suddenly crack the wall, Armand, like everyone else present, was inclined to take cover. Not until Victor started crying did his father consider how foolish he'd been to pay to sit in a dingy theater with 300 people. He felt foolish for having brought his son to the Midway Plaisance at all, yet since his goal was to show Victor as much as possible in the shortest time, he carried him from the Electric Scenic Theater and headed west toward the thatched huts and the Banquet Hall of Ireland, where the crowd thickened and slowed again, since everyone wanted to have a look at the stitched and embroidered underwear from the trousseau of the Duchess of Fife. He decided that the Duchess' underwear wasn't worth the wait, so he bypassed the banquet hall and headed directly to the Japanese bazaar. To comfort Victor, he bought a paper fan and walked on. The shopkeepers called to them and tried to lure the boy with more toys, but Armand ignored them and continued westward to the Dutch settlements, where lithe young girls were twirling in their red ballet skirts made of tree bark. When the girls stopped to rest, they left the Dutch settlements behind and went on to Germany, where a medieval castle stood at the top of a small rise. Dozens of people were waiting in a line to get inside. Victor wanted to see if there were swords on the wall. Didn't all castles have swords on the wall? But Armand didn't want to waste time in the line and pointed to a poster for a more tempting exhibition ahead. Cairo Street, said to be the one place at the fair that every visitor must go. He paid the 2 entrance fees of 25 cents and lifted Victor back on his shoulders, walking along in a daze. From a tower in the mosque, a muezzin called the faithful to prayer. 2 obelisks were inscribed with the names of Ramses II and President Cleveland. Vendors sold candy and miniature wooden sphinxes. A belly dancer entertained a crowd outside the entrance to the bazaar, and on the steps of the Temple of Luxor, a greeter called, "Come in and see the most ancient relics. Here everything is serene." Who cared that the building was an imperfect copy of an actual temple in Luxor, and the displays were made up of replicas? The other visitors didn't even seem to be aware that the gold wasn't real gold, the 12 mummies were wax models, and the Egyptians milling about were Sicilian immigrants. The public didn't know to be suspicious, and back on the street they were spellbound, Victor too, when a procession passed led by a priest in a leopard skin robe. The audience thought the whole scene dazzling and congratulated themselves on having made the effort to come to the fair. They agreed that Cairo Street on the Midway Plaisance must be as good as the real thing, and maybe even better. There were no blind beggars or starving children. The walkways were swept clean multiple times a day. Germany was less than 100 yards to the east. Algeria an equal distance to the west. A cup of tea was easily purchased, the toilets were modern, and the temple was lit with electric lights. If you stood there long enough, you would see two young lovers joined in a traditional Egyptian wedding. And if you remained even longer, you could count on overhearing one bystander say to another, as Armand did that morning, his heart sinking, "It sure beats traveling around the world." Thank you. Thank you.